catches Jesus and says, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? What's the greatest commandment? All these laws they had to follow as a first century Jewish person in this culture. What's the greatest commandment? Can you just boil it down for us? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And there's a second that's as equally as important. Like not second, like do this one first and this one second one. But there's a second that's equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the attorney goes, well, who's my neighbor? Like who's in and who's out? Like surely you don't expect me to love everyone. So who am I supposed to really love and who do I get a pass on? And so Jesus tells this story that we call the parable of the Good Samaritan. About this guy who was on the road. He was attacked, beaten, robbed, left for dead. 3 people come by. The first one, a priest, doesn't stop, doesn't do anything. The second one, a Levite, which is another church leader, doesn't stop, doesn't do anything. The third one, a Samaritan. The crowd that Jesus was speaking to didn't even know how to handle that. A Jewish person didn't even use the word Samaritan. They were despised. They were despicable. They were inbred. You didn't have anything to do with Samaritans. And while they're still recovering from Jesus using the word Samaritan, it got worse because Jesus made the Samaritan the hero of the story. It was a Samaritan who stopped and rendered aid and helped the guy and got him to an inn and left some money where he could get some care. And then Jesus asked the question, now who do you think was the neighbor? And the attorney couldn't even use the word Samaritan. It says, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus says, yes, go and do likewise. Listen, the bottom line of the story of the Good Samaritan is that Jesus was telling us we don't get to choose our neighbor. Whoever God puts in front of us, whoever is in our path, whoever lives around us, works around us, those are our neighbors. We don't get to choose our neighbor. We get to choose how to neighbor. And that's been the emphasis of this entire message series that we're wrapping up today is how to be a neighbor to our neighbor, how to love our neighbors. Not that we want to pick and choose who they are, but everyone that God puts in front of our path, how do we love our neighbor? And we've talked about some different people that are our neighbors. The first week we talked about orphans, loving on the orphans and helping those that have been called to foster and adopt, even if that's not us, and how we show love to the orphan. We talked about those living in poverty. And how God himself in Jesus came to deliver those that were living in poverty, to rescue those that are in poverty. That if we don't help those who are living in poverty, we really don't even understand the gospel at its very core. Last week we talked about those who are different from us. They look different from us. They act differently from us. They talk differently from us. And sometimes those things tend to separate us in life, and there's a us and a them, and there's a divide, whether it's along race or socioeconomic status or whatever it is. God calls us to love our neighbor. This morning we're going to wrap up this series by talking about loving the lonely. Loving the lonely. Now, I want you to think about the lonely in your life or around your life, and several different people may come to your mind. You may have an image of a kid at your school who sits in the cafeteria by himself or herself, or who never gets chosen or gets chosen last at recess. You may think of the coworker that you have, and everybody else is going out to happy hour after work, but the coworker never gets invited, or the coworker is never involved in any of the stories that happen at your work. There's that person that's lonely. You may be thinking about family, that in your family there are some that are in the inner circle, some that are accepted, and some that are outlaws, as we say. There are some that are lonely because of that. You can think of the widow. The Bible tells us that we're to take care of the widow, to honor the widows, to love the widow. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 3, honor widows. James chapter 1, verse 27, pure religion, real religion, is to take care of the widows who are often so lonely. Maybe it's the prisoner who doesn't ever get any visitors, who doesn't ever get any letters. Jesus is very clear that we're to take care of and to love those that are in prison. In Matthew chapter 25, when he's telling the story about the sheep and the goats, he says, take care of those that are in prison. Love me by loving those that are in prison. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3, remember those that are in prison. Some of those images come to our mind when we think about the lonely, but in all honesty, our culture is one of the most loneliest cultures in the history of the human race. We are the most connected generation because of these things right here. They call us the most connected generation because we're connected to anything in an instant. And because of all of these things like Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and all of these things, we can tend to appear that we're extremely connected. We have thousands of friends on Facebook or whatever it is, but yet scientists tell us that we're the most lonely generation because just because we have 1,000 followers on a social media app does not mean that we're connected to them in any way. In fact, some of the latest research from Barna says that almost 1/2 of Americans say that they're lonely, that they don't feel cared for, that they're on the outside looking in. Just look around this room. If that holds true, that would mean that 1/2 of us in this room this morning would confess or admit that we feel lonely, that we feel disconnected, that we feel like we're on the outside looking in. And this is not good. God himself said that in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. He creates Adam, puts him in the Garden of Eden, and then he says, this is not good. Everything was good. Light and day, land and sea, all the animals, everything was good in creation until he created Adam. And he's like, this is not good. Not that Adam wasn't good, but it wasn't good that he was alone. Lonely. It's God's ideal for us to live in relationship with other people. Listen, because we can all relate to this. There are few joys in life like being wanted, chosen, and embraced. Likewise, there are few pains in life like being excluded, rejected, and left out. C.S. Lewis talks about this thing he calls the inner ring. Now, I know that this is a hula hoop. Don't worry, I'm not going to hula hoop or anything like that up here. I wouldn't embarrass myself that bad, all right? But C.S. Lewis talks about this thing called the inner ring. And he talks about how as humans, we have this insatiable appetite to be on the inside of the ring. Like we would do anything to get on the inside of the ring. And once we're on the inside, it's not like you get voted in. It's not like there's this secret ballot and oh, you passed, you get to be on the end. There's nothing formal like that. It's this informal thing. And how we know that we're in the inner ring is that we're part of the inside stories and the inside jokes or the things that don't mean anything to people on the outside of the ring. And we have this insatiable appetite to be on the inside of the ring. Go back to your high school years. Let's do this. Go back to your middle school years. I'll give some of you a while because it's going to take you longer to get there than others. But go back to your middle school, your junior high years. Think about how hard those years were. And in a lot of ways, because of this thing we call the inner ring. Like you so desperately wanted to be inside one of the rings. You wanted to be in the athletic ring, or you wanted to be in the band ring, or you wanted to be in the brainy ring, or you wanted to be in the artsy ring. And all of these rings that we you wanted to be in the popular crowd ring, right? You can go back to your middle school years and you can remember being there. Thank goodness we outgrow this as adults. I'm going to wait for you to catch the joke. If you're a parent of a middle schooler or a high schooler, you know that this still exists today. Because you would sometimes do anything to help your kid find their place inside the ring. And as adults, we may think it's a little more subtle, but really not. We would still do anything to find ourselves on the inside of the ring. And here's the secret about the inner ring. is that once you feel like you're on the inside, you're really not, because there's always a deeper ring. And there's always a deeper place to move. And there's always this innate desire to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the inner ring. And so the reason half of all Americans feel like they're lonely is because we don't feel like we're inside the ring that we want to be in. Now listen, I'm not going to preach this morning on how to get into the ring, okay? What I want to preach on is how to see those who are outside the ring and make them feel connected, to love the lonely. And to do that, I want to go to a story in the Bible. You'll find it in Luke chapter 19. So if you got a Bible with you, if you got your phone or tablet or whatever, I would encourage you to go to Luke chapter 19. We're going to start in verse 1. We're going to read about 8, 9, 10 verses or so. As you turn to Luke chapter 19, some of you may go, oh, I know this story. Because this is the story of a man named Zacchaeus. And all of us probably know a little bit about Zacchaeus. In fact, you probably know that Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Yeah, so Sunday school lessons coming to life, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Let's look at the story of Zacchaeus. In fact, I just want to read it, even though most of you probably have heard it or know a little bit about it, because I think sometimes when we get to stories like this in the Bible, we go, oh, I know that story. But I think that every time we read the Bible, God has something to speak to us. And so let's just read it this morning. I'm reading out the English Standard Version. It says, he entered Jericho. He is Jesus. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Now, if you don't remember this from your Sunday school lesson as a child, here's what that means. He was hated. He was despised. There is no way that Zacchaeus was on the inner circle. The reason why is because tax collectors, they had this job that they were to collect tax. Have you ever wanted to invite a tax collector in the inner circle? And that's what Zacchaeus was, but it was worse in the first century because tax collectors, maybe you're going, no, it wasn't worse, it's the same today. Tax collectors would take the money that they were supposed to take, and then they would take even more, and the additional money that they took, they would pocket for themselves. And everyone in the culture knew this. Everyone in Zacchaeus' world knew this. And so Zacchaeus was despised. He was hated. He was wealthy because he was robbing the people. You need to understand that about Zacchaeus to understand this story. Verse 3, and he was seeking to see over the crowd. He was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. Listen, I'm just going to confess. I am trying to get into the inner ring of the people who are refusing to get reader's glasses, okay? That's why sometimes I can't see the scripture in the Bible. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. I think we learned three things from the story of Zacchaeus that I want to share with you today about loving the lonely. The first is this. Everybody needs somebody who sees them. Now, Zacchaeus was trying to see Jesus because he couldn't see over the crowd. So get this picture in your mind of Jesus passing through the town. And every time Jesus passed through a town or everywhere he went, there was this huge crowd following him because they wanted to get in on Jesus. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to hear from him. They knew the things that he was doing, and so they just would crowd around Jesus every time. But Zacchaeus, because he was a smaller man, couldn't see over the crowd, couldn't jump over the crowd, couldn't get high enough, and so he ran ahead and climbed up into a tree so he could see Jesus. His curiosity about Jesus, we're not sure, but he wanted to see Jesus. But the twist of the story is that Jesus saw him. Above the crowd, outside the crowd, around the crowd, Jesus saw Zacchaeus. Everybody needs somebody who sees them. I want you to think about the people that God puts in our paths every single day that we don't see. Maybe you can go back there in the parable of the Good Samaritan about the priest or the Levite. Last week I talked about maybe how they saw him, but they had good reason to continue to pass by on the road. But how many people does God put in your path, in my path every day, that we just don't see? Those that live on the outside, that walk through every day of their life feeling lonely, and we just don't see them. Everybody needs somebody who sees them. Now, listen, did the crowd want Jesus to see Zacchaeus? Absolutely not. The crowd wanted Jesus to see them. The crowd wanted Jesus to see anybody but that tax collector. But Jesus saw Zacchaeus. Listen to me. Jesus never let public opinion get in the way of who he saw. Jesus never let who the culture said he should see dictate who he saw. Jesus saw Zacchaeus. And here's the thing about this story. Because Jesus saw Zacchaeus, it changed the way Zacchaeus saw himself. And because Jesus saw Zacchaeus, it changed the way the crowd saw Zacchaeus. We may never know what will happen if we just see someone. Because everybody needs somebody who sees them. Here's the second thing I think we learn from the story of Zacchaeus. Everybody needs somebody who knows them. Everybody needs somebody who knows them, not just sees them, but knows them. What is the first thing Jesus did when he saw Zacchaeus? What's the first thing he did? He called him by name. He called him by name. And he began to have a conversation with Zacchaeus. Listen, here's how we typically do it in our culture, in our society, all right? We may see somebody, we may even know their name, and what's the first thing we think they need? A sermon. Right? Zacchaeus, you're a bad little man, right? You're not treating these people right. You're stealing their money. You're robbing them. Let me give you a sermon on what Jesus said about how wrong what you're doing is. Jesus said, Zacchaeus, come on down from the tree so we can talk, so I can get to know you. I want to know you. I've called you by name. I want to know a little bit more about you. You see, everything in our life revolves around the ring and the crowd. Like we want to see and know those in the ring with us, and we don't want to see and know those in the ring outside of us. And Jesus took all of that and turned it completely upside down. There was no ring for Jesus. If there was a ring, he was always looking for those who were on the outside. And he wanted to get to know them. He wanted to be in relationship with them. We can't get to know the crowd, but we can get to know a person in the crowd. Listen, you can't know all 2,000 followers, but you can know 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Jesus wants us to know people. Everybody needs someone who knows them. That's why one of our values here at Aldersgate is growing people grow together. Listen, it's not growing people grow together in a crowd. It's growing people grow together. It's getting to know. And listen, I want to say this, but I want to be sensitive when I say this. If you are here this morning, or if you're listening online and you're one of those who would say, yes, I'm lonely. I don't feel like I'm in the inner ring. I don't feel like I've ever been in the inner ring, or I always want to go deeper in the ring. Yes, I would feel like I am lonely. Then I would just ask you with the love of a pastor's heart, have you taken a step to get connected? Have you climbed the tree? Are you looking ways to get into relationships with others? Because everybody needs somebody who knows them. Let me give you the third thing I think we see from the story of Zacchaeus that speaks to us about loving the lonely. Everybody needs somebody who believes in them. Everybody needs somebody who believes in them. I'm willing to bet that when Jesus stopped at that tree and looked up at Zacchaeus, there was at least one person in the crowd who went, oh, don't even bother Jesus. Don't even bother with him. Jesus, don't you know about tax collectors? By the way, Matthew, one of the disciples that Jesus chose, was also a tax collector. What do you think this day meant for him? But I'm sure there was at least one person in the crowd who either thought it or said it out loud. Oh, Jesus, don't even bother with that one. And that's the one that Jesus bothered with. Why? Because everybody needs somebody who believes in them. And you know what I'm willing to bet by the end of that day, especially after Zacchaeus said, hey, I'm not only going to give back what I've taken from people, I'm going to give above and beyond what I've taken from people. You know what I bet? I bet those people in the crowd were saying this. I bet they were saying, well, if Zacchaeus can change, anybody can change. Because everybody needs somebody who believes in them. A couple of months ago, we had a young man show up at the church. I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday. It's not uncommon. It happens all the time. And he came in, he needed someone to visit with, needed someone to talk to. And so Matt, our college pastor, social media director, took him in and began to have a conversation with him, talk to him, and came to find out that he knew to come here to Aldersgate because he was part of our Impact campus, which, if you don't know, we have another campus at the Lubbock County Detention Center. And he was part of the campus there, part of Aldersgate there, and so came to the church. And Matt visited with him for a good while, hour and a half. Helped him think through some things and process some things, and gave him some things to help him with where he was at that day in that place. That same Sunday, as we were getting everything ready here to go for the 9:30 service and how all that goes on Sunday mornings, we were standing out in the lobby, and no one was in the parking lot unless you were on the media team or the worship team or the kids team or whatever. And I was standing there visiting with Raquel, our connections pastor, and she looked out one of the windows and saw the same gentleman sitting out on the curb outside the church. She said, I'm pretty sure that's the guy that Matt was talking to this week. I'm going to go out and visit with him and invite him in. And so Raquel went out and sat on the curb next to him, just sat right next to him. Began to visit with him, have a conversation with him, invited him in to the church, got him a cup of coffee, settled in for the service. He ended up staying for the next service at 11 o'clock as well. The first time I met him was after the 11 o'clock service. Got to visit with him just a little bit. That was a busy Sunday. We had a couple of meetings going on after church, and so we had brought lunch in, and so I made sure he got some lunch. And then, quite honestly, I just lost track because I was going into a missions team meeting, and I just lost track of him. Missions team meeting lasted a couple hours. When I came out, there was a note on the welcome desk here at the church. It caught my attention because it had my name on the top. It read, Pastor Ryan, I wanted to thank you in person, but I don't know where you are. I planned on killing myself when I got out of jail. Something inside me said not until after Sunday when I can go to church. I'm thankful for being here, and I'm looking forward to next Sunday. Words can't express how thankful I am right now. I'm speechless right now. Now listen, I want to tell you that I don't even remember what the message was that Sunday, and I'm sure it was stellar, okay? But the message is not why he had a change of heart. The message is not why he's still here and here today in this very room. It was because somebody saw somebody who saw him. Somebody saw somebody and got to know him. Somebody saw somebody and believed in him. And I believe that those people are around us every single day. And God wants to say to us today, quit trying so hard to get inside the inner ring. And instead, look at those who are on the outside and be a somebody who sees somebody. Be a somebody who gets to know somebody. Be a somebody who believes in somebody, because you never know what somebody's life may change. Because we decided to get serious about loving the lonely. Listen, I want to pray for us. I want to pray for two different groups of people in the room this morning, or those of you watching online. So if you would, just close your eyes with me and just pray with me. But to the first group, I want to pray for those of you that are sitting here this morning or watching online who would confess that you are lonely. That you so desperately want to be on the inside of a ring. Maybe life circumstances the last few months or however long it's been have left you in that place of loneliness. Listen, if that's you, I just want to speak into you. I don't have time to share the story this morning, but I want you to know, I know how you feel. I resonate with you. I get you. And I want you to hear this morning. Jesus will always be that somebody who sees you. Jesus will always be that somebody who knows your name and knows you. Jesus will always believe in you. And if you have no one else in this world today, and if you don't think that's going to change when you walk out these doors, and I want you to leave here knowing that Jesus sees you and knows you and believes in you, and you are not alone. To the rest of you who would say, I don't really feel lonely. I mean, I've had times in my life, but I don't really feel lonely. Then I would say to you right now, the person that God is putting in your mind, the image that you've had this whole morning while I've been speaking, maybe it's someone at your school, someone at your work, someone in your neighborhood, someone here in your church. Can you be a somebody who sees them? Somebody who gets to know them, a somebody who believes in them. And you just pray for that person or those persons right now, and can you just ask God to show you what your next step is? So that in a few minutes, or this afternoon, or tomorrow, or next week, instead of seeing them and passing by, you be the neighbor who stops and loves the lonely.